I made my son into a successful man, and he hates me for it. I don't dress it up anymore. I don't pretend I pushed him for his own good, or that I didn't notice the way his shoulders tightened when I entered the room. I built him like a project, a long-term investment with predictable returns, and for years I congratulated myself on how well it all turned out. Scholarships, medals, early admissions, a job people admire, a life with clean lines and polished edges. And somewhere along the way, he stopped looking at me like a person he came from and started looking at me like a weight he escaped. I've known this for a long time, longer than I've ever admitted. I felt it in the way he answered the phone with that careful pause, the way he said my name instead of Dad, the way his voice softened only when he talked to someone else in the background. I used to tell myself it was just distance, just adulthood, just busyness. But I'm old enough now to stop lying. The truth is simpler and colder. I shaped him with my hands, and he grew into someone who wants nothing to do with me, and I can't even blame him. My whole life, I mistook ambition for love. I mistook discipline for care. I thought if I kept him on a straight path, practices, competitions, tutors, the next step and the next, it would mean we were connected somehow. I didn't notice that every "you can do better" pushed him further away. I didn't notice that every proud nod I gave was just a quieter way of saying, "Not enough yet." I held him like a blueprint, not a child. And now he's a man with a polished life, a life people envy, a life I spent decades engineering, and he hasn't called me in almost 3 years. I sit with that. I let it land. There's no shock left in it, just a flat, tired understanding that I created the distance myself, piece by piece, the same way I created everything else around him. And I don't know when exactly I stopped seeing him as a son and started seeing him as the one thing in my life I could get right, but I did. I know I did, and he felt it long before I ever admitted it. I keep thinking people expect some dark explanation, some dramatic childhood or burst of cruelty that would make all this make sense. But there isn't anything like that. Our life was ordinary, almost painfully normal. A house that was always a little too clean, meals at the same time every day, a routine that never cracked or bent. I worked, his mother worked, we paid bills, folded laundry, watched TV in the evenings, birthdays with store-bought cakes, summers with the same plastic pool in the yard. Nothing chaotic, nothing frightening, nothing anyone could point to and say, "Here, this is where it went wrong." I thought that meant we were doing well. Stability felt like success to me. Predictability felt safe. When people saw us from the outside, they saw a family that functioned. A polite boy, a responsible father, a mother who kept the house warm, no shouting, no broken plates, no slammed doors. And yet beneath all that normalcy, I can see now how early the distance began. I'd come home late sometimes, tired, and find him at the kitchen table drawing or doing homework. He'd look up, smile politely, the way kids are taught to greet adults, and I'd pat his shoulder, ask about school, remind him of practice the next day. It all looked right, it all sounded right, but even in those moments I wasn't really with him. My mind was always on the next benchmark, the next tournament, the next test, the next opportunity. I thought I was being a good father by keeping him ahead, by making sure he never fell behind, by giving him every chance I never had. What I didn't see was how those chances felt like pressure to him. Not pressure like a heavy hand, pressure like constant air, invisible but everywhere, shaping him quietly. We never fought. That's what still gets me. There were no dramatic scenes, no rebellion, no shouting that could have warned me something was wrong. He did everything I asked without complaint. He showed up, studied, trained, performed. I thought that meant he trusted me. I didn't realize it meant he'd already learned to disappear in front of me. His mother used to tell me he was sensitive, that he felt things deeply. I nodded, said I knew, but I didn't. I only knew how to respond to achievement. Emotions made me uncomfortable. If he came home upset, I gave him solutions, not comfort. If he was anxious before a recital, I reminded him of the stakes, the importance of pushing through, the value of discipline. I thought I was teaching resilience. Maybe I was just teaching him that there was no room in our house for softness. Looking back, I can see the tiny moments now, the ones that didn't register then. The way he'd hesitate before asking for help, as if calculating whether it was worth it. The way he'd glance at me in the car after a performance, trying to read my face before deciding how he should feel. The way he'd laugh more freely around his cousins than he ever did with me. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could diagnose, just a quiet, steady drifting that looked like maturity on the surface. People think love dies in big moments, but sometimes it just never grows. Sometimes you raise a child in such a structured, efficient life that there's no air left for connection. And because everything looks normal, you don't notice what's missing until it's too late. I didn't hit him. I didn't yell. I didn't abandon him. I just wasn't there in the way that mattered, and no one warned me that normal could be its own kind of damage. There was a long stretch of years when I convinced myself I was doing everything right. I was the dependable one, the father who never missed a practice, who drove to early morning lessons before sunrise, who rearranged meetings so he could sit in the back row of every competition. People told me I was dedicated. They said he was lucky to have a parent so involved. I believed them. I wore that role like a badge. I built my identity around being the steady force pushing him forward. And on paper, I did all the things fathers are supposed to do. I paid for the expensive coaches, for the prep courses, for the interviews and summer programs. I made sure he never had to worry about the things I worried about growing up. I was always there, standing in the hallway outside the exam room, waiting in the car after late practice, reviewing his schedule at the beginning of each week. But presence in the physical sense doesn't mean presence in the emotional one. And that's the part I didn't understand until much later. I thought consistency was connection. I thought reliability was love. He did everything well. He excelled. And every time he reached a milestone, I felt a swell of pride that had less to do with him and more to do with me. It's embarrassing to say that now, but it's the truth. His success made me feel like I'd succeeded, like my methods were justified, like I'd found the formula for raising someone who wouldn't repeat my mistakes. But he never looked at me with joy after those victories, relief maybe, or exhaustion, sometimes a tight, polite smile. I mistook that for focus. I mistook everything for something it wasn't. I remember one night more clearly than others. He must have been around 12. He'd won some competition, music, I think, and we drove home in near silence. He kept his hands folded on his lap, staring out the window. I told him I was proud. He nodded, didn't smile, didn't say anything. At home, his mother hugged him, told him she loved watching him play, asked if he wanted to celebrate. He hugged her back, really hugged her, arms around her, face in her shoulder. When he stepped away, he glanced at me. There was something in his eyes I didn't understand then, a distance that looked like politeness, like respect. I thought that meant I had earned authority. I didn't realize it meant he had already accepted that I was someone he needed to perform for. I kept fulfilling the role year after year, arranging his life like a schedule board, making sure every gap was filled with something productive. People admired how driven he was. They didn't see the way he'd look at his shoes when someone complimented him, or how he'd freeze a little when I corrected him in front of others. I didn't see it either, not really. I saw only the result, a boy who followed the plan, who hit every target, who could be presented proudly at family gatherings. I taught him how to succeed, but I never taught him how to come to me. Not with joy, not with fear, not with anything unpolished or uncertain. He performed and I evaluated. That was our rhythm. There were moments that should have broken through to me, like the time he bought me a book for my birthday, a simple book, something he thought I'd enjoy. I thanked him and placed it on the table. I didn't open it. I had emails to answer. He stood there for a moment waiting, and then he quietly walked away. I didn't think about it again until years later, when I found the book still untouched, the spine stiff, or the way he'd linger in doorways, as if debating whether he should ask me something and then decide against it. I assumed he was independent. I didn't see it as avoidance. It's strange how you can be in the same room as someone for years and never actually meet them. I lived by routines, by goals, by measurable progress. He lived by expectations he never chose. And while I thought I was giving him structure, what I was really building was a distance so firm he mistook it for the shape of fatherhood. I stepped into the role fully, confidently, never realizing the role itself had replaced the relationship. I thought I was shaping him into a man, but I think the truth is simpler. I was shaping him into someone who needed to leave me to breathe. I didn't question it then. I didn't see the cracks forming, but they were there in every quiet car ride, every half smile, every shoulder stiffening when I offered one more piece of guidance he didn't ask for. And now, looking back, I can't unsee it. I can't unfeel the way my own presence must have felt to him. Heavy, narrow, unavoidable, a father who was always there, except in the ways that matter. It didn't break in some dramatic way. There was no shouting match, no slammed door, no moment where he finally told me what he'd been carrying all those years. If anything, the end came quietly, the way a house settles at night, a slow shift, barely noticeable, until you realize the whole structure feels different. I remember the day that stays with me, though. It wasn't special. Actually, that's why it stays. I had gone to visit him in the city where he lived, the one he'd moved to right after graduation. A clean, modern apartment, the kind you get when you've done everything right. He opened the door, stepped aside, let me in, polite, controlled. He asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes, though I don't think either of us wanted anything from each other except to get through the visit. While he made it, I walked around the living room, trying to take in the space he'd built for himself. It was neat, minimal, no clutter, no softness. In some ways, it looked like a more polished version of the house he grew up in. I stood by a shelf and noticed a photo. Him with some colleagues, smiling, relaxed, his hand on someone's shoulder. A real smile, not the tight one he used to make after performances. It hit me harder than I expected. I realized I'd never seen that exact expression directed at me. Not once. He handed me the coffee, sat across from me, and we talked, or tried to. He asked about my health, my routine, the repairs I'd been meaning to do at the house. I asked about work. He answered without details, the way people do when they're keeping you at a distance without wanting to seem rude. We kept circling around safe topics, like two people who'd been introduced by a mutual acquaintance, not a father and son. At one point his phone lit up. He glanced at it, smiled, a small automatic smile, and typed a quick reply. That smile stayed in my mind long after the conversation moved on, because it wasn't for me, and it was effortless. When it was time for me to leave, he walked me to the door. He hugged me, a polite, practiced gesture that lasted barely a second. I told him I was proud of him. He nodded, not uncomfortable, just unavailable. And I knew, standing there in the hallway, that the hug was for my sake, not his. I drove home in silence, 3 hours on the highway with nothing but the low hum of the engine and that smile he'd given his phone playing over and over in my head. Somewhere along that road, the truth finally stopped hiding. It wasn't a sudden revelation, more like a slow thawing of something I'd kept frozen for decades. I realized I had never known what it was like for him to talk to me without fear of judgment. I realized every achievement I pushed him toward had become a wall between us. I realized that he had learned to succeed, not because he wanted to impress the world, but because he had been taught that success was the only safe way to stand in front of me. And the worst part was this: he was happier without me. Not because he was ungrateful or cold, but because I had made myself a place he could only perform in, not rest in. After that visit, the calls grew fewer. Then they stopped. There was no final conversation, no explanation, just a quiet fading, like a light dimming slowly until you can't tell when the room went dark. I kept waiting for some kind of event to force us back together, a crisis, an argument, anything, but nothing came. Just silence, a silence that stretched long enough for me to start hearing all the things I had ignored for years. His mother used to say he felt things deeply. I used to say he'd toughen up. That night, sitting in my empty kitchen, I finally understood what she meant. I remembered him as a small boy, exhausted after practice, eyes red, trying so hard to hold himself together because he knew disappointment was something I couldn't handle. I remembered him sitting in the back seat after performances, hands trembling just slightly, waiting for my verdict. I remembered how rarely he initiated conversations with me, how he chose his words like someone navigating thin ice. I didn't see it then. I didn't want to. I told myself he was focused, disciplined, ambitious, but sitting alone in that kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of that smile not meant for me, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not guilt exactly, not regret, more like the recognition of a truth that had been waiting for decades. Patient, quiet, impossible to escape now. I raised a successful man, but I never raised a son. And now that he's gone, not dead just far, emotionally farther than anyone living should be, I finally understand the thing I spent years avoiding. You can build a life for someone, shape them, polish them, guide them, and still have no place in their heart, not because they're ungrateful, but because the space where love should have grown was filled with expectation instead. And once they leave, that space doesn't suddenly clear. It's just empty, clean, echoing, too late to fill. After that realization, the house felt different, the air heavier, the rooms sharper. I walked through the hallway looking at old framed photos. Him at the piano, him on the field, him with medals around his neck. Every picture a record of achievement. Not one of them showing the two of us together in any real way. I had built an archive of his life, but none of it had anything to do with us, and that's when it hit me fully, painfully, quietly. There's no coming back from this. Some things don't break loudly. They just stop being what you thought they were, and you only notice when you're finally still enough to see the cracks. The years since then haven't been dramatic. They've just been quiet in a way I wasn't prepared for. The house feels larger now, though nothing about its size has changed. I move through it slowly, not out of frailty, but out of something else I don't have the right word for. A kind of stillness that comes from knowing there's no one on the other end of the phone who's waiting for you. No one checking the time to see if you're running late. No one listening for your footsteps in the hallway. People talk about loneliness like it's a sharp thing, a knife or a sudden drop. But I've found it's more like a gradual fading of warmth. You stop noticing when it started. You just realize one day that the air hasn't held anyone else's laughter in a very long time. I've tried a few times to imagine what I would say to him if he suddenly called. Not some dramatic confession or apology, just something simple, something I never managed when it mattered. I picture myself asking how he's sleeping, if he's eating well, if he ever found a way to relax without feeling guilty about it. But those are thoughts I only allow in imagination. In real life, there's no call coming, and I've stopped pretending there will be. He built his life far from me, not geographically, that would be easier to accept, but in the ways that matter. The emotional distance is the part you can't cross, no matter how many highways you're willing to drive. I keep the house in order, I always did. The yard is trimmed, the tools hung neatly in the garage, the kitchen counters wiped down after every meal. Routine has become the only thing that still fits me. I used to believe that being steady was my greatest strength. Now it's just a habit I've worn down to its final threads. Sometimes I sit in the living room with the lights off, the way I used to when he was a teenager coming home late from tournaments. Back then, I told myself I was staying awake to make sure he was safe. The truth is, I was staying awake to make sure he stayed on schedule, that he didn't slip out of the rhythm I set for him. Now I sit there because I don't know where else to be. I've lived so many years in the future, planning, calculating, pushing, that I never learned how to exist in the present without someone to shape. When he left, the future left with him. I think that's what people don't understand about parents like me. We don't set out to control, we set out to build. We think we're giving a child every chance, and then quietly, without meaning to, we start molding them for our own peace of mind, for our own sense of purpose. And by the time we realize we've crossed a line, the child has already learned to live without us. He's successful. People tell me that often, like it's supposed to be a comfort. They say I should be proud. And I am, in a distant way, the way you're proud of a building you once helped design but no longer have access to. I see his name in articles sometimes. I hear about him through family. Accomplished, respected, a man others look to. But I know nothing about his actual life. I don't know what he fears now, or what he dreams about, or who he turns to on the days when everything feels heavy. For all the effort I put into shaping him, I'm a stranger to the person he became, and he's a stranger to me, not because of some tragedy or betrayal, but because we simply never learned how to be anything else. I've stopped imagining reconciliation. That's a younger man's hope. The kind you cling to before you understand how fixed people become in their own stories. He's written me out of his, not violently, not angrily, just quietly, like closing a door you don't plan to open again. And I'm not fighting that anymore. I'm too old, too tired, too honest with myself now. I spend my evenings in the same chair, the one his mother used to sit in. The fabric's worn smooth on the arms. The sun hits the room differently at this age, softer, lower, with a hint of finality. Sometimes I wonder what she would say if she saw me like this. Not to comfort me, she wouldn't do that, but to tell me the truth I avoided, while she was alive. She always had a way of seeing the things I ignored. Maybe she saw this ending long before I did. Maybe she understood that raising a child isn't the same as knowing them. The silence doesn't hurt as much anymore. It just exists, the way any unchangeable part of life exists. I don't fill it with excuses or fantasies. I don't pretend there's a lesson buried somewhere in the rubble. There isn't. There's just a man who pushed too hard for too long and now lives in the aftertaste of his own choices. I don't know if he'll think of me in 30 years or if my absence will be just another blank space he steps over without noticing. Maybe he'll clean out this house someday and find the old photographs, the programs from his competitions, the calendars I used to fill with his goals. Maybe he'll feel something, or maybe he won't. That part isn't mine anymore. My world has shrunk to these rooms, this routine, this quiet, and strangely enough, there's a kind of clarity in that. Not peace, I don't think I've earned that, but understanding. A final, solid understanding that the life I built wasn't the life we needed. He grew into a man people admire, and I grew into someone he doesn't call. That's the truth I carry now. Not as a punishment, not as a wound, but as a fact, a simple, heavy fact that sits in the room with me. I don't reach for hope. I don't reach for closure. I just sit here, letting the last of the light fade across the floor, and I let the truth stay where it is. No softer, no harder, just real. I made my son successful, and he doesn't love me, and there's nowhere left for that to go.